This is Jack Delaney of YourFantasyFootballCoach.com, and entering the 2015 season, I know a lot of people don't have time to look at draft profiles or check out scouting reports and get familiar with some of the newer players entering the NFL. So I figured I'd make a quick little video and start with Kevin White just to give people a basic idea where he comes from, what to expect from him, and just his general outlook for the 2015 fantasy football season. So White was actually a junior college transfer. He went to West Virginia in 2013, and he's criticized for his drops and concentration issues, and I think you can chalk that up to him just being in a new environment, different competition levels, having to learn a new playbook. But he finished the year with 35 receptions, 507 receiving yards, and 5 touchdowns. In 2014, he was obviously able to carve out a bigger role in the offense. He finished with 109 receptions, 1,447 receiving yards, and he hauled in 10 touchdowns. When people started to look at the top receivers in this draft class, everybody pretty much agreed it was Amari Cooper and Kevin White. Most people gave Cooper the edge just because they felt he had more competition throughout his college career as opposed to White, who was a JUCO transfer. But in his senior season, White actually competed against 5 ranked opponents, and 4 of those opponents were ranked in the top 10 during the time that they played him. So Cooper does have an advantage at Alabama, but it's not like White was just going out there and facing a lack of competition. He actually played against some good teams, so I don't consider that a knock on him that he wasn't playing good teams, because he was. So if we look at the combine, this is where he really made a name for himself. He ran a 4.35 40-yard dash time, and some analysis before were comparing to Kelvin Benjamin, which I thought was crazy, but I don't think they just knew enough about him to really give him a good recommendation almost, or to really say that he was a guy who was in the top of the draft. But he did show that with his 40-yard dash time, and he actually tied as a top performer in the bench press with 23 reps. So he did make a good name for himself in there, and a lot of people were questioning whether he was in fact a little bit of a better fit for some teams as a first pick instead of Amari Cooper. So he ends up going 7th in the draft, and he's selected by the Chicago Bears. They have a big loss with Brandon Marshall, even though he was starting to see a little bit of dip in his production down the road. He is a little bit of an older receiver, but that still is a big hole to fill. And for fantasy football purposes, Marshall and Jeffrey actually recorded more than 1,200 receiving yards each in 2013, and they combined for 19 touchdowns. So there aren't a whole lot of offenses who can make 2 wide receivers fantasy relevant, but the Bears were able to do that in 2013, and even though Marshall was fighting some injuries and didn't get as much playing time as previous years, Jeffrey still found himself as a top 15 receiver. So that shows that whether it's 1 or 2 players, that there is at least one receiver who is relevant for the Bears, which obviously is important if you're considering drafting White. So to look more into the fantasy outlook, we have to consider Jay Cutler. We have no idea if he's going to turn things around or if he's just going to completely fall apart. So that's important when you're going to be drafting a rookie wide receiver. You want to know that he's at least has a stable quarterback situation, which it's about 50-50. People just don't know what to think of Cutler now. So that's a little bit of a risk you're going to have to take when you're drafting White. But some sneaky facts behind the Chicago Bears is that the new offensive coordinator, Adam Gase, he was actually Eddie Royal's wide receiver coach in 2009. So he does have experience with Royal, who just signed with the Bears over the summer. And Royal's actually averaged 704.5 receiving yards in San Diego over the past 2 seasons. So while he may not necessarily be fantasy relevant, that is a huge chunk of yardage, and he's going to receive some looks from Cutler just because Gase is familiar with how to use Royal. Also, you got to consider the fact that Matt Forte, he finished with an insane 102 receptions and 808 receiving yards. So he's the definition of an extreme pass-catching back. And that's just a lot of targets. That's a lot of yards. And I believe he had 4 touchdown receptions. So that all takes away from any receiver in Chicago. And especially if Cutler is going to find himself in trouble, he's going to look dump offs for Forte. Gase might not use him as much in the passing attack, but he's still a guy who's going to, at the minimum, probably get at least 200 receiving yards, and maybe the maximum this year, 450 to 500. So that's a chunk away from White. Also, you have Martellus Bennett, who he may receive an increased role because Marshall is gone. He saw his numbers go up when Marshall wasn't in there, and he has more of a rapport with Cutler just because he's been there. White's going to have to really carve out an edge, and it's going to be interesting to see how this works out. I think he might have a chance to finish in the top 20 in PPR leagues and standard scoring. Put White maybe right outside the top 20, maybe like a 25th receiver. He'll finish the year ranked as, but that's just a basic kind of profile, and I'm going to look to do it with more rookies just to give you a breakdown and just some things to keep an eye on in case you don't have time to do a lot of preliminary work for your drafts, and just to give this as a quick guide to what to look for these guys. So thanks for checking it out.